A.J. Brown breaking free. Brown is in. Touchdown.
Foot race. Samuel lunging to the pylon. Touchdown. Justin Fields making magic happen. There goes Fields. Touchdown. Oh, what a catch made by DK Metcalf. Oh, my goodness. Lets it fly. It's Evans. It's a touchdown.
Intercepted. Running down the sideline. He's in. Touchdown, New England.
Blown coverage. It's a touchdown. First career score for Cyril Grayson.
Welcome in, everyone, to the Lucky Shots podcast. It is the fantasy show. In a little bit, we will be joined by Vic Quick from KOTA Territory and KEVN News. He's a sports anchor over there. We'll be joining you with him, and we will be in the Skyline Studios, so stay tuned for that. Real quick, we'll knock out who the Fantasy Kings and best of the rest were this week. At the quarterback position for the Fantasy Kings, we had Josh Allen. He had 29.46 fantasy points, 250 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 55 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Great game for them. Game itself was a little close, but Josh Allen got it done. At the running back position, a guy that hasn't really even cracked the top 25 at all this year, Michael Carter. He had 32.2 fantasy points, 77 yards on the ground with a touchdown, and 9 receptions for 95 yards in their upset win this past week. At the wide receiver position, A.J. Brown. He had 31.5 fantasy points, 11 targets, 10 receptions, 155 receiving yards, and a touchdown. And then at the tight end position, guy who's been kind of quiet for this whole season, T.J. Hawkinson. He had 11 targets, 10 receptions, and 89 yards. Moving on to the best of the rest. We'll keep it short and sweet so we can get with Vic in a moment. But best of the rest, we have Michael Pittman. He had 30.6 fantasy points, 15 total targets, 10 receptions, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns. A huge game for him. Then we had Joe Mixon. He had 25.1 fantasy points, 33 yards on the ground, and a touchdown, along with 4 receptions for 58 yards and another touchdown. Then Tyreek Hill finally, but this week, got a lot of volume. He had 27.4 fantasy points, 18 targets, 12 receptions, 94 yards, and a touchdown. And then the big shocker of the week, the Jets, they had their crazy upset win over the Bengals, but it wasn't Zach Wilson at quarterback. It was Mike White, who had 26.1 fantasy points. He had 405 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, did have 2 interceptions, but still a lot of passing yards. He got it done for fantasy and got it done on the field for that upset. So, that's it for this beginning portion. We will now hop in with Vic in the Skyline Studios. We'll be right back. All right, we want to welcome in Vic Quick. He is the KOTA Territory and KVN sports anchor here. Vic, it's good to have you in.
Good to be here. I'm happy to be here and talk a little pigskin with you.
Yeah, so you got a win this week. You did better than I did in any fantasy
Finally.
league.
I actually I'm in 5 leagues, so I went 4-1 last week. I think that's my first week. I think where more than half of my teams won, so I'm happy. It's been a rough year for me so far.
Well, and Vic could quite possibly be the creator of fantasy football. How long have you been playing, Vic, and how's it changed?
Well, I don't know that I'm the creator. I started in 1990 when I was 15 years old. If you can do the math, you can figure out how old I am. But, I was a 15-year-old kid. I started the league. I was a commissioner, It was with my dad and a bunch of his friends at work and a couple of my uncles. And I was the commish because I think I was the only one that the other guys trusted. Because back then, it was obviously pre-internet, so you had to do the score by hand. So I used to go every Monday. I'd get the newspaper, and I'd go. And now back then, most of the leagues were just touchdown only.
Right.
Ours was touchdown only, so it was 6 points for touchdowns, 3 points for passing touchdowns, and then 3 for field goals and 1 for. So kickers were actually pretty valuable back then because an average score was like 35-30. So
quite different than nowadays.
Yeah, so it was touchdown. So yeah, I used to go through the paper, and I feel like it was an 8-team league. That was back when there was only 28 teams in the NFL. So yeah, I would go by hand and fill it all out, and I did that. I was a 8th or 9th grader when we started that, and I did that through high school with the same group of guys. In fact, I even saw one of my dad's friends I saw a couple years ago, and he was talking to me about it. He remembered doing it, and I've done it every year since. So I got to college, I did it there, and then thankfully the internet came about, which was a great invention for fantasy football. But yeah, it started out a thing that even football fans didn't, like in 1990 we were doing it and you mentioned it and people were like, well, what is fantasy football? Even football fans, they didn't know what it was. It was
right.
Very niche, and obviously it's grown with the internet and it's taken off with things like FanDuel and DraftKings and, stuff like that. But yeah, it is changed a lot, and I've been doing it a long time. Doesn't mean I'm any good at it, but I've been doing it a long time.
Well, it's definitely changed quite a bit. Definitely, I feel like a lot more goes into it now, all the stats and all that kind of stuff. So speaking of which, this week we got buys from the Detroit Lions,
That's
Seattle
good.
Seahawks. At least they can't lose this week, right?
There you go.
Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Washington football team. So those players kind of leave a hole in a lot of fantasy lineups.
Yes. I actually have DeAndre Swift in one of my leagues. He's a big gun at running back, so I'm not going to have him.
Right. So we'll go ahead and dive into the running backs then. Who are some guys that you think either you could pick up off waivers or might be sitting on your bench that you would plug in for him this week?
Well, I've got in the league that I'm not going to be starting DeAndre Swift. I'll probably be starting James Conner.
Okay.
You're probably not going to be able to pick up James Conner, but he's a guy that is probably going to be a backup on most people's bench.
For sure.
So yeah, he's a guy. I would guess Jeremy McNichols from the Titans. That's a guy that people are going to have there. I'm sure he was probably the top waiver claim for most leagues this week with the running back situation. But I don't know. It's because they got Adrian Peterson.
Yeah,
so I mean, for this week, that's probably a good pickup. But I don't know long term how long that works. I also like Nyhim Hines from the Colts. He's a guy that he's kind of an under the radar guy, and he's kind of got that because obviously they have Taylor, who's great, but he's kind of got that. I call it the James White syndrome. He's got that, like, you can be watching a game with Nyhim Hines and you can be like, oh, he's not doing anything, and then you look and he's got 10 points because he's got 5 catches for 50 yards, and boom, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of that quiet fantasy production.
Yeah, he's kind of a smaller volume version of J.D. McKissick when J.D. McKissick really gets into the game and gets 8 to 10 catches, 100 yards and a touchdown. One guy that I'm kind of looking at because of the injury to Miles Sanders we saw last week, what that backfield's going to look like. And one guy that was really involved was Boston Scott.
Yep.
He was a guy you didn't really know whether or not he was going to be that guy because they had Kenneth Gainwell, who
was a rookie.
Looked really good.
Yep.
He had a few good games, but last week it was Boston Scott, it was Jordan Howard, both those guys getting into the end zone twice.
I saw Boston Scott was picked up in 2 of my leagues last night, so he's already gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's definitely a guy. And Jordan Howard, I didn't even know was on the Eagles. So did they just sign him? He's on the practice squad. He had 2 touchdowns though against the Lions, as you said.
He's been, I think he's been there.
Okay.
He's just been,
practice squad
overshadowed by everybody else that's in their squad. But Miles Sanders, don't know how long he's going to be out.
I'm not a big Miles Sanders guy.
Somebody like, Boston Scott for the Eagles.
Yeah.
He's not going to be a long-term fix, as where
Who do the Eagles have this week? They got the Chargers.
Yeah, and the Chargers are really susceptible to the run game, so it could be a good week for the Eagles on the ground. But do you think that mostly is just going to go to Jalen Hurts?
Well, they're obviously going to give the ball to a running back, but I think he's risky. But yeah, if I was going to take an Eagle, I would probably go with Scott.
Yeah, for sure. And then at the quarterback position, you got Tom Brady out this week. The only major quarterback out, unless you have to start
Were you saying
Jared
Jared
Goff.
Goff's not a big deal?
Yeah, I was going to say, unless you got to start Jared Goff in some league. But a guy that I'm really looking at, he's had a good couple of games the past couple weeks. And, he's going against Houston, so that's a great matchup. Is Tua. Tua looks good this week. He's got a projection of 19.2 in two similar matchups, the Falcons and the Jaguars. He had almost 500 pass yards, 50 rush yards, 6 touchdowns, and averaged 24 points in those games. So
there you go. I don't mind Tua, and they've got they've got Mike Gesicki at tight end. They've got Devontae Parker and Jalen Waddle. So they've got some guys that you don't think of as good receivers. I've got Gesicki in a league. I really like him. Mm-hmm. So he's got some decent receivers out there.
Yeah, he's got plenty.
And
of
Myles
weapons.
Gaskin catches a lot out of the backfield too.
Yeah, exactly. He was another one that I thought as a running back, if he's sitting on your bench, you could probably plug him in this week. Another quarterback you're kind of thinking of?
Well, let's see here. Carson Wentz, if he's unowned in your league. Carson Wentz is kind of that quarterback version of Nyhim Hines. Like you can watch the game and you're like, hey, he's not really doing that well, and he's got 21 points. Because he kind of in the Colts. Michael Pittman has obviously come on the last few weeks. He's been a good receiver for him, and Taylor and Hines both catch the ball quite a bit out of the backfield. So that's kind of an under the radar offense, I feel like, and they're going against the Jets, so that should help the cause. Like I don't think he's gonna, put up 30 points or anything, but I think if you're looking for 18, 19 points, I think Wentz has got a good chance to hit that, or maybe even go a little bit above that. Yeah,
for sure. And I talked about it on my show yesterday. I think the Colts are kind of a dark horse to just kind of slip their way into the playoffs this year, I think.
I like the Colts. I've always been in the early I'm a Cowboys fan, for those that don't know. So the early 2000s, the Cowboys were not very good. And so I was always a Peyton Manning fan. I was always a Colts fan. So I like the Colts, and I agree with you. I think they're pretty good. They should have won that game probably last week, or at least could have won that game against the Titans at overtime. But no, I think that's an underrated offense.
Yeah, and they're always real close, And
a good defense too.
Yeah,
fantasy defense.
Yeah, for sure. And then wide receivers, Vic. There's a lot of wide receivers out this week. Metcalf, Lockett, Evans, Godwin, Brown, Terry McLaurin. So that's a lot of holes at that wide receiver position. A guy that I'm looking at, he's definitely owned by just about everybody, but he might be sitting on your bench because of the past couple of weeks that not just him, but the Chargers have had. Mike Williams.
Yes.
He's only projected 13.6.
He had some big games early on, I believe.
He had a really big beginning of the season. And honestly, if you look at when Herbert's been doing really good, it's because he's getting Mike Williams involved. And, this week they're playing Philly. I feel like this is a week that they're going to get back on track.
No, they should. The Eagles are not very good.
Yeah.
I'm a Mike Williams fan. I had him last year in a couple leagues, but I'm definitely a fan of him. I'm trying to think here. Who else I'm trying to think. Who are some other good streaming options you get out there for receiver, and I'll give you my thoughts on them.
So Hunter Renfrow.
From the Raiders?
The situation right now.
Yeah, he could be playing a lot more.
It's really, for him, it's pretty good, career-wise.
I have a dynasty league. I have Hunter Renfrow in that league, but I dropped him a couple weeks ago to pick up Kadarius Toney, which was a good thing.
Right.
But I might look into, but no, I think Renfrow with Ruggs out, I think he had some decent games in the first few weeks of the season. I think that Monday night game, the opener against the Ravens, he put up some decent stats. But yeah, he could do some things for you.
Yeah, he gets a lot of targets, gets about 6 to 7 catches a week. It's just they're not big catches and they're not touchdowns.
Right.
So without Henry Ruggs, obviously Darren Waller is still there, but those targets kind of got to go somewhere else unless they throw to Waller 20 times, which is not out of the question.
I like some of the Bills receivers this week. Emmanuel Sanders, he's probably owned. I've got him in a league. I like him going against Jacksonville. You could even go down. Cole Beasley might be. A lot of people have kind of dropped him because he's kind of had not as good of a year as expected. If you're reaching, even like Gabriel Davis, he could have a decent game against the Jags.
Well, in a game where there's a lot of touchdowns to be on the board for the Bills, it's kind of, you're going to have Stephon Diggs.
Right.
You can almost guess you're going to have Emmanuel Sanders, but there's a couple more touchdowns to trickle
I like
down,
Sanders.
I think,
he gets in the end zone a lot, it seems
yes,
like.
he does. So with all of those being out of the way, who are some of the top players you think for this week based on matchups and stuff like that? We'll start at the quarterback position.
Well, I think Dak's going to probably throw for 600 yards and run for 3 touchdowns against the Broncos.
Vic, I wouldn't be surprised. We don't really have – we're kind of skating by right now, so it could be a big week for the Cowboys.
I do like Dak, but I don't know that I would actually think him as one of the top guys this week, just because he's still questionable. I'd assume he's going to be in there, but I doubt they're going to have him run much.
Right.
So I doubt he has one of his better games this week. Joe Burrow, Bengals against Cleveland, I could see that as a high-scoring game.
Yeah.
The Browns had a low-scoring game with the Steelers last week, but the Bengals have been putting up points on a pretty regular basis. I like Burrow in there for quarterbacks.
Well, and staying in that game, what do we think about the news with Odell Beckham Jr.?
Yeah, they've always got some kind of drama. Drama just kind of goes to Baker Mayfield, I think. Even when it's not his doing, he always seems to be involved with that somehow.
Right. I don't know how that offense. I think the offense when Odell is not on the field looks better. Period.
Right.
So I think.
Well, that's how it was last year for sure.
I think it could be a lot better for Cleveland this week without him on the field.
And this happened right after the trading deadline, so that's probably not the best timing. What do you think of that Sunday night game, Rams-Titans? What do you think of Stafford? Do you think that's a high-scoring game, or how do you think that game goes?
I do. I think, people are kind of interested to see what is Tennessee going to be without Derrick Henry. They've got weapons to throw the football.
Right.
And A.J. Brown's really been coming on these past couple weeks. So I think it's going to be high scoring. I think Matt Stafford, I said it last week that I thought he could be the top scoring quarterback. He was very close. But this week, in a game where I expect it to be a shootout, Tennessee gives up 23 points per game to quarterbacks.
Okay.
And he's got the weapons of Woods, Higbee, Cooper Kupp, who's absolutely dynamite.
Right.
I think it's going to be a big week for Matt Stafford.
Kyler Murray. That's he's probably. If I had to guess, the top point getter, Arizona and San Francisco. That Niners defense hasn't been what it used to be.
Very questionable.
I think Kyler Murray's probably in store for a big game against the 49ers. And I think Mahomes. I'm hoping the Chiefs. I really would like to see the Packers lose, so I'm hoping that Mahomes can kind of bounce back and have that Packers defense isn't great. So I'm hoping that I kind of see that. With obviously no Aaron Rodgers.
Right. So what do we think of Jordan Love then?
It depends on your options. Like I'd rather go with Carson Wentz than Love or Derek Carr probably. That's another guy. That's Carr's a guy that could be available or is on your bench. I feel like against the Giants, I could see him having a decent game. They obviously don't have Ruggs, but I feel like Carr's a little bit like that, like Wentz in that you watch him, it doesn't look that great, but he's got 18, 19 fantasy points on a pretty regular basis.
Well, his stat line, it doesn't normally translate to fantasy all that much, but he's an underrated gunslinger. He goes out there and
I've got him in one of my leagues. I've got him when I think I'm starting him on most weeks instead of Russell Wilson. And he's okay. I mean, he's not going to put up 35 points, but I don't think he's going to put up 10 either.
Right, yeah.
You know, he's going to get in that 18 to 20 range on a pretty regular basis.
Fairly safe player there. But yeah, going back to that Arizona game, the Green Bay game. We saw last week a guy make his first start for the Jets, and it went pretty damn well for him. So possibly we could see that from Jordan Love, especially against a Chiefs defense that hasn't really stopped anybody through the air.
I mean, the thing with him is we don't really know what to expect.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a risky play. But, I mean, I would rather have Jordan Love than, say, Mac Jones.
Yeah, yeah.
Nothing against Mac Jones. I think he'll be a decent real-world quarterback. But, Love has got more upside this week than those type of guys. But I'd rather have Wentz or Carr.
Yeah, for sure. At the running back position, what are we thinking there?
For big games?
Yeah.
I like Zeke. And not just because the Broncos actually have a good, but because of what I said about, I don't think the Cowboys are gonna run Dak much. I mean, Dak he tends to steal about a touchdown from Zeke every other game.
Right.
I don't think you have to worry about that this week. I mean, Pollard could steal a touchdown from him, but Zeke's been playing really well, and he'll get his share of carries for sure. Alvin Kamara against Atlanta. I would think he's going to have a big game. Although the Falcons, we think of the Falcons as horrible. They're not horrible.
5-2.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah, the Falcons aren't a horrible team. They're not great, but they're not as bad as people think they are.
Yeah.
They lost to the Panthers last week in a tight one, but they're an okay team.
Yeah, and the Saints, it's kind of a hard game to gauge. One, because there's no Jameis Winston anymore.
Right. Simeon looked decent, though. Your man, Trevor Simeon.
Yeah.
Broncos should have kept him.
No, thank you. But,
He looked all right, though. Seriously.
He did.
He looked pretty good.
It was a good game from him. It was a clean game. No interceptions. Like, he just went out there and got the job done. And it's an offense, or it's just a team as a whole that they're kind of like the Packers. They haven't done anything flashy, but they just go out and they do enough to win football games.
Right.
And, and again, there will be no more Michael Thomas this season. I believe it was his ankle that he messed up, and now
they messed up the surgery or something along those lines.
So
right? I heard that
he's gonna not be in the rest of the season. So the Saints, thought they were gonna get him back. They're not going to. So kind of just more of the same from them.
Is Christian McCaffrey back this week?
He's practicing again this week. Still no word on whether or not he'll play. Probably gonna be one of those annoying players that's a game time decision.
But the Patriots have a pretty good run defense.
Yeah.
So even if he's back, I wouldn't see him having a huge game.
I would. I mean, he's just so involved.
Yeah.
And volume, especially in fantasy, when it's a guy like McCaffrey and he just gets an outrageous volume, he's going to be bound to score at least 20 points. He'll get at least 8 to 9 catches and 50 yards about on both ends of the ball. So I think it'd still be a good
What
game.
about Dalvin Cook? I got him in 2 leagues. He started out pretty good, but the last couple weeks he's not been doing a whole lot going against the Ravens.
Yeah.
I can't imagine him having a huge game, but hopefully he can come through and do something.
I mean, he's a guy that's always kind of banged up.
Right.
We put him in that top tier, but his health does not warrant him to be in that top tier. And against the Ravens, if you look clear back to when the Colts played them, Jonathan Taylor had a huge game.
Right.
And I think if Dalvin's healthy, he's got the chance to do something more along those same lines. And honestly, Minnesota always plays games very close.
Yes.
Doesn't matter who it's against, and I don't know why, but every game they have is always super close.
And they find a way to lose.
Yeah, and I think the stat I saw was it's been every game except for one this season that they have, it's regardless win or loss, it's been a one-possession game.
Okay.
So I think Cook's going to have to continually be involved in this game, so I think he's got a plenty good chance.
I like Jonathan Taylor, obviously.
too.
I see him having a big game tomorrow night against the Jets.
I think he'll be the top running back.
Yeah, I would. If I had to bet on who's the top running back, I'd probably go Taylor. Although Thursday night game, he got a lot of carries, I believe, on Sunday against the Titans. So they may want to mix in Nyhim Hines a little more. I'm not a big fan of the Thursday night. It feels like the Thursday night games aren't that high scoring. It always feels like feels like they're like 2017.
Well, and this is not a. Is this a divisional game? No.
The Jet. Nope. It used to be.
So
back when I started fantasy football, it was.
So sometimes these Thursday night matchups, they're divisional games,
right?
And you just see some crazy stuff, and you don't understand what's going on, but it's happening. And the Jets possibly carry over some momentum from last week.
Yeah, Mike White did. They threw for 400 yards.
400 yards.
Former
3
Cowboys
touchdowns.
draft pick, by the way.
Yeah.
It was a good week for Cowboy backups.
It must have been. So let's go ahead and hop into some receivers.
All right.
I think
Debo.
As long as he's
I love
healthy.
Debo.
I do.
Yeah,
too.
he's questionable, isn't
Yeah,
he? What's wrong with him?
It's his calf, I believe.
Okay.
But it's something he's been dealing with for a few weeks now, and he was limited last week and had 150 something yards.
No, the man is amazing. I've got Debo in a league. I took him in the 9th or 10th round, and I didn't really want to take him.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I did because he's now my best receiver. And I had him on the list of wanted him maybe a little later. I knew he was a guy with a chance for upside, but yeah, he is really. He's really the only good wide receiver on that team.
Yeah.
And he's still putting up 150 yards like it's nothing.
I was in the predicament while drafting of taking either him or Brandon Ayuk. I felt like Brandon Ayuk from last year had a lot more upside, but I went with Debo because I trusted it more, and it has paid off.
And he doesn't even. The thing is, he doesn't score that many touchdowns.
Yeah.
Or not as many as he. If he was scoring touchdowns like Cooper Kupp, he'd be putting up 1998 Randy Moss numbers.
If he should have had 2 touchdowns last week, and I'm still very salty that he didn't because it honestly would have won me both my leagues.
I like Hollywood Brown against the Vikings probably too.
Yeah.
I feel like he can have. He's another guy who has really stepped up this year.
That whole passing offense has.
Yeah.
Let's look at since Lamar Jackson's been there. How has this offense looked? It's been all run game,
right,
and no passing game. This year, they're finally getting that involved.
And Hollywood Brown, before this year, he'd have a couple 50-yard touchdown, 3 or 4 a year. But so that made him a boom or bust guy because it seemed like he'd either have 3 fantasy points or 17.
Right.
But he's getting way more consistent.
Yeah, and I like Hollywood this year. He was actually, I'll talk about it in the awards after I get off with you. But he's one that I saw as a sleeper this year.
Yeah.
He was drafted real late and ended up getting up there into that top 10.
Absolutely, him and Debo are both guys that you could have got as backups that are your top receivers now.
Yeah. A guy that it's kind of questionable, but A.J. Brown, they're going up against the Rams.
Right.
He'll probably be shadowed by Jalen Ramsey most of the time. But going off those last 2 weeks, he's averaging almost 30 points a game in the last 2 weeks. He's really starting to take off, and without Derrick Henry, I think that has to continue.
Yeah, and in that game, Cooper Kupp obviously has just been doing crazy things, which upsets me because I got Robert Woods in a league, and Matt Stafford apparently can only throw the ball to Cooper Kupp in the red zone. Although Woods had a couple touchdowns last week, but one of them was running.
Yeah.
But, Cooper Kupp is putting up, I think I saw he's the first receiver through half the season to have, 9 touchdowns and 8 or 9. Does he already have 900 yards or 800?
Yeah.
He's putting up numbers like we've never seen. Is the gist of it.
I actually do have that stat line up in here, 924.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just absolutely outrageous. And a fun fact as well, if you want to look at the Vikings, Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson.
Yep.
Them together still don't equal Cooper Kupp this year.
Wow.
They have just as many receptions together, but yardage, touchdowns, not the same.
I've got Thielen in the league. He could be frustrating because he scored a touchdown last week, had a decent game, but yeah, he can also think that when they played the Lions, the game against the Lions, his first catch was with like 45 seconds to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very up and down for him for sure. And then looking at some tight ends, a guy that I'm kind of questionable about is Kyle Pitts. I think he should, because there's not extra receiving targets there, that they're going to go to him. But because Calvin Ridley is not there, they're going to start now focusing probably double coverage on Kyle Pitts, which could cause some problems. But he's by far the best.
He's putting up good numbers.
They have.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen a lot of the I don't know that I've seen a Falcons game yet this year, but he's definitely putting up good numbers on a regular basis. Are we under the radar guys for tight ends? Let's see here. The Redskins have, or the Washington football team, I apologize. I was going to say Ricky Seals-Jones, but they have off this week.
Yes.
But he's a guy, in future weeks, he's a guy that I like. He's been putting up some good numbers here of late.
Yeah, and, going to be interesting when Logan Thomas comes back to see if they keep both of them involved. Because
C.J. Uzomah, he is probably picked up now in most leagues. But you can check your league because he's a guy. I picked him up in my Dynasty League. I had Logan Thomas. And when Logan Thomas got hurt, I picked him up. And I have Waller, too. So I've got
There you go.
And then I was kind of fortunate that the game Waller missed was the game Uzomah. I put him in, wasn't that happy about it. And then Uzomah had the 2 touchdowns and like 80 yards.
Yeah, that would have been the same week because I believe it was Dalton Schultz.
Yes.
As my tight end, and it was their bye week, so I took a flyer on Uzomah, and he ended up being the top scoring tight end. So
he is really coming on for the Bengals.
Yeah, and that offense is kind of just starting to look like very pass heavy, and I kind of like it.
I like Mike Gesicki against Houston this week.
100%.
I think he could get 100 yards.
Yep, and we just talked about Tua earlier. So if you believe in Tua this week, you're going to have to believe in Mike Gesicki because, Jalen Waddle, he's involved. But Gesicki, you look even back to last year. When Tua is successful, it's because Gesicki is successful and vice versa. And in a game against Houston, who's awful, they give up 11.5 points to tight ends on average. It should be a real good week for him, I think, too. What do we think about Dallas Goddard in a game against the Chargers?
I mean, Dallas Goddard's he's a top 10 tight end for sure, maybe top 5.
Yeah.
I think I could see him having a decent game. I mean, I think I could see the Eagles getting behind for sure and having to pass. So I could definitely see Goddard having a big game this Sunday.
And I think it could be a shootout game as well because the Chargers defense really hasn't done a lot to stop people. The Eagles, we saw against Tampa Bay, they look like they just rolled over halfway through the game. So I think both these offenses have a really good shot at putting a lot of points together.
Dawson Knocks from the Bills, he's out, right?
Yes.
Is he? Okay.
So his backup is Tommy Sweeney. He's a guy that I thought might have a good game.
Yeah, that's
week.
a guy you could take a flyer on. They're playing Jacksonville.
Yeah.
Depending on what your options are.
And, if you're worried about there being so many different receiving options, he's still going to get involved. He was still involved last week. It wasn't for a lot. It was a few catches, maybe like 30 yards. But, you get down into the red zone, he's a big guy, possibility for a touchdown.
Jared Cook, too, in that same Eagles-Chargers game. I like him for the Chargers.
Yep.
I could see him having a decent game, although he's not steady. He's kind of up and down too.
He's touchdown dependent. If there's not a touchdown there, he's sub 10 points.
Right.
So, that's what I got for tight ends. I think it's going to be a fun fantasy week. There's a lot of good games on here. Last week was kind of a slow week for fantasy. Not a whole lot of huge breakout games for anybody.
Don't play any Broncos. That's my advice for you.
I would also concur there. As a Broncos fan, definitely.
Maybe McManus. He'll be kicking a lot of field goals.
If we can even get down there. Yeah, I mean, the Cowboys this week, I would go ahead and start everybody, you know. You could probably start Tony Pollard and still be all right.
I've done it.
Yeah?
I've got a league where my running backs aren't great. I've got Pollard. Although he has not been – Pollard had a few good games early on the season. He seems like now that Zeke has come on, he's playing. He's playing, but whereas he was getting 10 to 12 carries earlier in the season, it seems like now he's getting in that 5 to 8 range.
Yeah, he's getting cut back, but
if the Cowboys win big – and Pollard's the type of guy that he could come in the fourth quarter and get you 50 yards and a touchdown like that.
Yeah, a lot of garbage time points for him there for sure. And the Broncos, dumbest organization. I ranted about it yesterday. I'll rant about it again. Get rid of all of our pieces for absolutely nothing in return. And a caveat of sending away Von Miller, we're still paying his salary for the rest of the year. So, you know, it's just – and we didn't even get a player out of the deal. And
I think that that could hurt the Broncos this week just from the morale standpoint because you look, you know, it's like we traded one of our best guys and we didn't even get anything tangible for right now. I mean, you get a second and third round pick that could turn into something good. But for the guys on the team now, that's got to be a letdown.
Well, and look at who's on their team. Who's a big-time leader now?
Right.
Von Miller was the leader of this team. He'd been there through everybody. Everybody that's on that roster, Von was there before. The
Broncos are 4-4. It's not like they're 1-7 and they made this trade. I mean, they in the AFC they're still in wild card contention. You know, that's an odd trade to make when you're still in the playoff mix.
Well, and if we were gonna do this, it should have been 2 years ago when a lot of people were interested in Von Miller, and you could get a better price.
Multiple number ones. You could have gotten 2 number ones probably.
Well, we would have just drafted quarterbacks anyways. All right, well, Vic, thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was good times.
Yeah, and we hope to see you again soon.
All right, sounds good.
All right, well, thank Vic again, and we are in the Skyline Studios, so again, want to thank Work for not kicking us out. All right, thanks, Vic.
Thank you.
All right, we want to thank Vic for being on the show. Really enjoyed having you on, Vic, and hopefully we can get you on again soon. We're going to finish off the show today with the Player Mid-Season Awards. It is award season, at least mid-season award time. So at the quarterback position, the best quarterback is Tom Brady. He's got 201.9 fantasy points. He's averaging 25.2 points per game. He leads the league with 2,650 passing yards, 25 touchdowns through the air, and even 1 on the ground. And so far this season, he has had 5 25-plus point games. He's just tearing it up. The Bucs are doing really well. So Tom Brady is if you drafted him, he's been a great attribute for your team. At the running back position, we're going to go with somebody besides Derrick Henry because obviously he was the first half of the season MVP, but he just got hurt and is out for the rest of the season. So who else but Austin Eckler here at this best running back spot? He has 153.2 fantasy points, averaging 21.9 per game, with 420 rushing yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground, 33 receiving yards for 33 receptions for 302 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns through the air. He has 5 20-plus point fantasy games so far this season. At the wide receiver position, Cooper Kupp. He is first in every single receiving category. 63 receptions, 924 receiving yards, 10 touchdowns. He has 214.9 fantasy points, which I also believe leads the league, and has 26.9 per game. He has 5 games with 100 yards or more, in 4 games with 30 points or more. He has become a huge weapon for the LA Rams. The comeback, or skipping ahead too far. The best tight end is going to be Travis Kelsey. Yeah, the Chiefs have been not great. Yeah, Travis Kelsey's had slow games, but even with the Chiefs not looking great and him having slow games, he's still the best tight end in the game. He has 45 receptions, 533 receiving yards, and 4 touchdowns for a total of 122.3 fantasy points, averaging 17.5 per game, and he has 5 games with 15 points or more, which is more than any tight end in the league right now. Like I said, even though the Chiefs aren't looking good, Travis Kelsey is still going out and getting you fantasy numbers. The Rookie of the Year, this one isn't really hard to choose. It's Jamar Chase. He has 38 receptions for 786 receiving yards and 7 touchdowns. He's accumulated 159.3 fantasy points so far this season, averaging nearly 20 points per game. He's had 4 games of 20 plus points and has 6 weeks with a reception of at least 40 yards or more, and a few of those have been touchdowns. The Breakout Player of the Year, this one also doesn't seem like it's a huge question mark. It should be Cordero Patterson. He has 32 receptions, 333 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns on the ground, or through the air, and then 268 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns through the air, averaging 19.2 fantasy points per game. This is why he's the breakout player. Before the season started, his average draft ranking for running backs was the running back 88. He is the running back 8 on the year, so obviously he has been the biggest breakout star and probably waiver wire diamond that anybody picked up this season. Then the sleeper pick. Who got slept on in the draft this year? That was Marquis Brown. His ADP going into all drafts was the wide receiver 49. He's currently the wide receiver 10. He has 37 receptions, 566 receiving yards, and 6 touchdowns. That equates to 130.1 fantasy points overall and 18.6 points per game. A lot of it has to do with the Ravens are finally actually throwing the football now, and we get to see Marquis Brown be Hollywood and go out there and make some great plays. And then we'll wrap it up with the MVP. Again, no shocker. It's going to be Cooper Kupp. 5 games of 100 yards or more, 7 games with 7 receptions or more, 4 2-touchdown games, and 6 games with a touchdown. He has 4 30-plus point games and 3 games with a 50-yard reception. He's dominating right now, and if you have him on your team, if you drafted him, and you probably were able to draft him a little later in those middle rounds, he's been an absolute steal, and he is winning you week in and week out. He has got to be the fantasy MVP so far. By the end of the season, we'll see who cracks this list and who either stays on or gets knocked off by somebody else throughout the rest of this season. That is it for this week's show. Join us tomorrow. Dylan Corbett will be on the show. We'll go ahead and take some looks at the betting lines and all those kind of betting questions that you may have. So that is tomorrow. We want to thank Vic Quick again for being on the show. This has been the Fantasy Show. Thanks for watching.